Welcome to the Creative Warriors Podcast, the heart and soul of photography. I'm Ariel, Faith, your host. We are welcoming this week a very special guest. We're welcoming Erin Hogue. She is specializing in action adventure photography, and I am so excited to have her with us. She's going to share her journey and a whole bunch of stuff with us. So we are welcoming her. Welcome, Erin.
Thank you. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Good. Now, if you don't mind, I would love to hear a little more about your genre itself and then the journey that took you there. How did you end up where you are right now? And then so share the how and then where you are right now.
Where I am right now. Yeah. So I work in action adventure photography. And so that's a lot of skiing and snowboarding is where I started. And I kind of grew up looking at snowboard magazines and seeing all the photos that they have published in snowboard magazines. And I thought it would be really amazing to be able to take those photos one day. And so I read an article actually in one of those magazines that was from someone who I work with and a mentor of mine. And he said in the article, if you want to be a snowboard photographer, you have to buy black outerwear so that when you're shooting in the backcountry, you look like a rock. And you blend into the background. And when they're filming, they can't see you in the film shot. So buy black outerwear, move to the mountains and live in a mountain town and shoot anyone and everyone who will move in front of your camera. And that's basically what I did. I was like, oh, I can do that. That doesn't seem. And so I moved from the suburbs of Ontario where there's no mountains. I didn't even really know what the backcountry was until I moved to Whistler. And so I moved to Whistler and basically bought black outerwear and started shooting anybody that would move in front of my camera.
Very, very cool. How did you know that you would be passionate about this? Do you know what I mean? Because you said you used to watch the magazines. What was it that attracted you to it?
Yeah, I think I was just always drawn to it. I grew up snowboarding and loved it. And then end of high school, I started skateboarding too. And then I went to university and I studied fine art photography. And I dabbled a little bit in the commercial industry in Ontario throughout my university degree and afterwards. And I wanted to shoot something that I was passionate about and that I really loved. And so I kind of looked at my life and was like, okay, let's just assume I'm going to live till I'm 100.
You will.
I was like 24 now. When I looked at this, I was like, okay, I'm 24 now. I've already done so much. And I've already done so much. And I still essentially have 3 or 4 more lives, like 3 additional lives to live. So if I have that amount of time, how do I want to break it up? And I realized if I wanted to do action sports photography, it was now or never, because I am going to be like the fittest. It's a young industry, all of those things. And so I knew that if I wanted to do it, I had to try and do it then, and then I could move on to other things. And so I moved to the mountains and I was like, oh, I'll give myself like 2 or 3 years. And if I can make it happen, I'll do it. And if not, I can always come back to Toronto and work in the commercial industry or work in another area of photography.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because when we started talking earlier, I mentioned that it was so exciting to me because if I could go back 30 years, some of the work you did, doing it while you're young enough, doing it while you have that endurance to fight the cold. To me, it's like, if I could choose to grow up again, that would be, I love what you do. It's so exciting and it's fun. I used to live in New England and we skied, we didn't snowboard, but oh my gosh, what an exhilarating experience. You know what I mean? So I understand your passion. I get it from a intrinsic point, but the fact that you do that. Now I have to ask, because this is very interesting to me. Tell us how you got your first paid work and your first, did you submit 2 articles or 2 publications, and then share with us where you are currently being published in?
Okay, so
you're only 24. Did you just say that?
When I was 24 is when I started. or when I started shooting snowboard photography. And that's when I started shooting snowboard photography. And before that, though, the first kind of photo I got published and first paid gig was through kind of a fluke. When I was in high school, a friend of mine was skateboarding or said that he wanted to skateboard across countries to raise awareness for cancer prevention. And so his name's Rob Dyer, and he started a nonprofit called Skate for Cancer. And I did a ton of work with that at the end of high school. And before I went to university, I kind of had a gap year. So I did a ton of work with that. And that's when he skateboarded from LA to Toronto. And I really wanted to get out of my hometown. And I thought it would be such an amazing experience to be a part of that. And I always loved photography. And so I convinced them to take me on the road with them if I could shoot photos for them. Cool. And so that's what I did. And it was back, I think I had a 35 millimeter film camera. So I was back shooting film. And that was the first photo I got published in SBC, a skateboard magazine, was a photo of him skateboarding across the country. The photos, looking back now, the photos were brutal. They weren't very good, but it was a good story. And so I got really lucky that there was that good story that I jumped on board with, and I started working in with that, and then went to university. And then when I graduated university, a publication came to me because he was then going to skateboard across Canada. And so then they came to me to be a part of a blog that they were doing. It was like a new website blog thing. And it was like very new at the time. The internet was very new, and they had all this backing behind them from Bell Simpatico, which was a huge website at the time. And they wanted me to start like part of their action sports stuff and do weekly blogs for them. And at that time, I also had my own blog where I was just kind of posting photos of the trip and a little bit of a blurb so people could follow along. And so that's sort of how it started, is I kind of found a good story to tell. And then the pieces kind of fell into place. And during that trip, it was probably an 8-month long trip. I was shooting the same subject matter, and I had one camera and one lens. And through the course of that blog, you can kind of see the photos get better and the photos progress. So when I started, they were horrible. And then by the end, they were a lot better. And I wish that blog still existed so that I could go and you could see that progression, but it died. It died in a web.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like a site, and the blog didn't survive. But that's sort of how I got the first photos published, and the first gig in photography was for that website, was my first like full paid gig. And so that was kind of how it started. And then since then I've worked for so many publications. And then, sorry, what was the rest of your question? I think
you're so humble. I love that you're so humble, because you actually photograph for some magazines that I think most, especially nature photographers or anybody that works on the outside world, any genre, for crying out loud, would love to film or have their work published in those magazines. So I'm going to let you not be humble, and you can share what those are.
Oh, yeah. So since working for that publication, I've been kind of published in a lot of the action sports adventure magazines within snowboarding and that sort of thing. And then a few years ago, National Geographic approached me to submit and to do some work with them. So I started by working on they have a roster. It doesn't fully exist anymore because of short form video, but their Instagram account. So I started by submitting to their Instagram account, and then looked for some areas where I could fit. And then that's how it kind of turned into a job and a paid position, or where I started selling some photos with them. And that's who I've been working with since then.
That's pretty cool.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that's cool?
I do. They're really amazing to work with. And they tell a lot of really great stories, but it's like working with any publication. Like most publications, I started by submitting to them. And only a few of them came to me first. And that just happens to be one of them that had heard about me. And it's funny because when they approached me, I was like, oh, how did you hear about me? And why? Like, I haven't submitted to you. It's weird that you're coming to me first. And they said,
are you real?
Yeah. Yeah. So I always ask that. And so he said that it was through one of two contests that I had won. So I had won an X Games gold medal for photography. And I had also won a Sony Alpha Female photography contest. And it was through one of those contests. He's not sure one. And that's how he had originally heard about me. And then when they were looking to expand their roster, he approached me.
Very cool. See, I told you, that's very, very neat. And I'm sure there's lessons you've learned through that experience that are valuable. Working with a publisher who has very high standards makes you look at photographs very differently, I would imagine, than if you were just putting it up on Instagram. Or I would imagine you look for things that how long have you been photographing?
20 years.
20 years? 20 years. Okay. So, you know how we grow in our vision and we see things we wouldn't have saw before, which sometimes you're really glad about, but then other times you're like, you can't look at somebody else's photograph without seeing them. So you're like, I don't want to be judgmental, but everybody's where they are, right?
Yeah.
But I would imagine that experience working with that magazine and some of the other magazines has really helped you develop a very strong artistic vision. Would you agree?
In terms of like the stories that I want to tell and how to visually tell them. Is that what you?
Yeah. I mean, the fact that you immediately do you consider yourself a photojournalist at all or not really? I mean, is that kind of what you're doing?
Yeah, it's kind of more documentary than journalism.
Okay.
Started out doing, I guess it would be more journalism when I started and worked with my friend that skateboarded across country. And now it's more documenting snowboarders and documenting what's going on within action sports and like what tricks are going down, where people are getting to, kind of how they're pushing the boundaries of the sport. It's more in that kind of area now.
That's neat. That's really neat.
And then I like commercial and lifestyle photography as well. So I don't really fully say journalism, but I do focus on the storytelling part of it. And so it's more kind of documentary, telling stories and kind of trying to visually show the stories and the emotions.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And that's what's so neat about your work is it's not just a pretty picture. There's a story that you tell through the series, through the article, so it's the journey of a person and everybody has a story, right?
Yeah. There's lots of really great stories that need to be told.
So what is one of the biggest challenges that you personally faced in this career, especially being a woman?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest challenges, I mean, it's hard to say because I don't know how things would be different if I wasn't a woman. I had so many amazing opportunities and so many amazing people have helped me out along the way. And I don't really know how that would be different if I wasn't female. And so it's a really difficult question to ask. I think the common, hurdles that everybody kind of faces in this is just kind of being told that you're never going to make it and that everybody wants to be a photographer and there's no money in photography. Those were all things that kind of tripped me up a lot in the beginning. And as a result, I left so much money on the table in the beginning because I didn't know how to charge for my work. I didn't think that anyone was ever going to pay for it. When people told me I had no budget, I was like, oh, okay, that's fine. Instead of actually learning how to negotiate, how to kind of present those prices and make it so that you're somebody that people want to work with and that you're bringing people a lot of value. And that way they want to work with you and kind of how to show that and showcase that. So that tripped me up in the beginning a lot. And then also just being told that everybody wants to be a photographer and that you'll never make it. I actually had somebody tell me that once. So there's two types of people in the world, those that make it and those that don't. And I was one of the ones that wasn't going to make it. And so just those common things that people love to tell photographers that I think can trip people up along the way. But I always looked at it someone has to take the photos. Someone's made a career doing this. So if somebody else has, then why can't I also do that? And if there's anything that I can think of that would be oh, why can't I? If I can kind of combat that, then you can kind of like negate it. So one thing that somebody said to me in the beginning was the very first time I went to the backcountry, some friends took me out into the backcountry and we snowmobiled to get back there and to get around to the different locations. And after that, I had decided I needed to buy a snowmobile and learn to snowmobile. And this was 15 years ago. So the sleds were very different back then. They were a lot harder to drive. There was very few girls that were doing it. And I told a friend of mine that. I was like, oh yeah, I think I'm going to get one. I think I'm going to try this. And he was like, what? He's like, you can't sled. Like, you're too small. You'll never be able to do it. Like, even big guys struggle sledding. Like, there's no way. Like, you'll never be able to do it. Girls can't sled. And I could have let that stop me. But instead I was like, no, I feel like they can. I was like, I have one friend that sleds and I know these two other girls that sled. So I was like, if they can do it, then like, I'm going to do it too. Doesn't matter the fact that I'm 5'1" and very small. I still feel like I could do it.
So you have an inner tenacity, maybe? Would you say?
Yeah, I think tenacity is really important in any creative pursuit that you're doing, is to just not stop.
Yeah. You know, and some of those voices that we hear from other people that are negative, I think we've all heard them. But sometimes when it comes from the people closest to us, it's the hardest to hear.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if it's from some crazy person on the internet, you know, you can just brush it off. But when it's, you know, somebody who should have our back and they're really giving you good, honest advice based on their own experience, but they just kind of like, they're afraid. So their fear is trying to stop you, right? So I'm personally glad you didn't let that fear stop you. And you just said, well, I'll give it a try, right? If it doesn't work, it doesn't work.
Yeah.
That's what I heard earlier.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's kind of, it is. It's usually the other person projecting their fears on you or their own limitations onto you. And you can either listen to them and let them limit you or be like, okay, I'm going to try it anyways. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work.
Exactly. How do you stay motivated and inspired in your work, even during times of difficulty?
So if I'm finding that I'm becoming less inspired, I'll shoot something different or focus on like a different area of a project, or find a side project that I'm really passionate about that I want. So if there's like a story that I think really needs to be told, I'll do that as a side project, or I'll shoot something that I've never shot before. So that's how I started shooting surfing, is I was a bit not uninspired, but I was hitting a lot of roadblocks within snowboard photography. And I was like, you know what? I've never shot surfing. I love being in the water. I'm just going to go and shoot surfing and be really bad at it and just be in the water and have fun. And so
be really bad at it.
One of the, yeah.
Well, that whenever we start into a new path or new genre, we are not very good at it in the beginning. But that's the whole point, right? You learn, you grow.
Yeah, and I think it always like doesn't matter what you're shooting; it'll infuse whatever your main thing is.
Exactly.
So, yeah. So
yeah, 100%.
Infusing.
Yeah. Now, do you go in the water when you shoot those? Because fighting the waves and trying to shoot and not get your camera destroyed is a really big challenge.
Yeah. Yeah. And I also tried to learn how to shoot surfing in Canada. So it's freezing cold. And
that is cold.
Yeah. And it's big. So there's tons of rips. There's tons of currents. It's all beach break. And so it's even really hard to be able to swim around because you're just getting pulled by the waves. Whereas if you go somewhere where there's what's called a reef break, then the waves are breaking in the same spot. So it's really easy to swim out, really easy to shoot photos. You know where the wave's going to be. You can set up a shot. It's not like that on a beach break. Like the waves are breaking everywhere. There's currents everywhere. There's rips everywhere. And you're just kind of getting pushed around. So that's where I decided to learn. So it's the hardest place. I remember the first time I went in, I was borrowing a friend's water housing. And I came back in from the water and I messaged him and I was like, I don't understand. I didn't think there could be anything more challenging to shoot than snowboarding, because snowboarding, it's all based on the weather. You have to have good snow. You have to go out. The features have to be there. The athletes need to not get injured. It's just, if you get one photo in a day, it's a really good day. Surfing was even more difficult than that. So I called him and he's like, this is even harder than snowboarding. I don't understand. Like, how do people do this? And he told me that I chose the most difficult place to try and shoot surfing. And then I was like, oh, okay, that makes sense.
So if I can do it there, I can do it anywhere.
Yeah. I was like, no wonder it was so hard. It just felt like mayhem.
Mayhem. Yeah. Oh, I can imagine. I just did a beach shoot and I was in the water and I was like, man, and I didn't have a water housing. So it was like, I was trying to, keep it from getting destroyed. It was like, I think you need a better protection on your camera than just a plastic bag at that point.
Yeah. You definitely, need pretty good housing to compete with that.
Very cool. Well, I'm looking forward to talking to you again. We're going to come back again and we're going to talk about being balanced in life and having a more mindful approach to your work. So we're going to talk about that the next time we talk. So we will see you again. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
One more question, Erin, before we go. Tell our audience where they can find you online and how they can learn more about your education and what you offer.
Yeah, so probably on Instagram. It's Erin Hogue is my Instagram. So it's just my last name, my first name. And in the links on there, they can find all the information about the courses. I run free workshops every now and then, so they can sign up for a free workshop. They'll get a taste of what the full course is all about. If they're interested in that, they can also just go to my website, which is also just my name, and that's where you can see more of my work. And then keep an eye out. I'm going to do some more conceptual fine art photography. So if you're more interested in that, you can go to hogueart.com or keep an eye out. So that's going to be changing.
Oh, cool. If you enjoyed this podcast, The Creative Warriors, the female heart and soul of photography, please like, subscribe, share, and comment. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep the conversation going. Stay curious and have a happy artistic journey. Thank you for listening to the Creative Warriors podcast, the female heart and soul of photography. See you next episode.